Good morning, Grace Church family. We are so excited to have another Stories of Faith. And this morning, I have the honor and privilege of interviewing Laura Stevens. So, Laura, start off by just introducing yourself to us.
For sure. So I'm Laura Stevens. Some of you might remember me by my maiden name, Laura Carr, from my earlier years at Grace Church. So my family started attending Grace when we moved to Aurora when I was at the age of 4. So from 4 to 16, I actually did go to Grace Church, and then God's brought us back in the last, I think it's been about 3.5 years since we've been coming. So I am a wife to Scott Stevens, not the hockey player. And we've been married for 9 years as of this past September 1st. And we have 2 beautiful girls, Summer, who is 6 in June, and Kyla, who is almost 4. And because it has to do with our conversation, what I do for a job is I am actually registered with the College of Psychologists of Ontario as a school and clinical psychological associate.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm excited for you to share with us today things that have been going on in your life. So tell us a little bit about what God has been teaching you recently.
Awesome. Okay. So God, I think, is always teaching me things. So it's hard to okay, I could say so much, Anna. But Anna and I have had a really good conversation at the beginning of the summer, which really helped me to reflect on God's hand in my life to get me to where I am professionally. And I think it's really important to kind of share my life verse. So my life verse since going on a missions trip in grade 9 has always been Proverbs 16:3. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. And what God has taught me all these years, and then especially when I was reflecting on my journey with Anna, I'm realizing so much that my plans have succeeded, yes, but they weren't my original plans. They were God's plans that have become my plans, which is super cool. So, for example, I went to Tyndale for my undergrad in psychology, but I'll get to that a little bit more. And one of my professors was a school psychologist before teaching, and she would talk about learning disabilities, and I had no interest at all. And now that is a huge part of what I do is diagnosing, assessing and diagnosing, and then consulting about learning disabilities in particular with my current role within the school board. So that's just something that's super cool, how I had no interest. And then now that's where I am. And that's my passion as well. Not just learning disabilities, but just how God has kind of brought that forward for me. And so just rewinding a little bit, we were talking about how did I even get here? So when I was in high school, I did a co-op with Valley View Alliance Church and the youth pastor at the time. But I also had a leadership role on the student-led ministry team, leadership team, I guess, that was part of the worship services on Friday night. And so I had this huge passion. I also led junior high for youth in particular. But I didn't feel called per se to be like a youth pastor. That wasn't my calling. I never felt passionate about that, but I did feel passionate about youth. And so after I finished high school, I ended up going to Providence College in Manitoba for youth leadership. And I thought I wanted to go to Bible college, and I knew that. And oddly enough, I never wanted to go to Tyndale. Out of all the Bible colleges I could go to, Tyndale was definitely not one of them. So that's also where God's hand was kind of at work. While I was at Providence, though, he started to get me excited about the idea of therapy and being a therapist. And yes, I do therapy now, but it's not my main job. So it's not what I do the most of. So it's interesting even how that worked. So it's just really cool. So while I was at Providence, though, God gave me a very vivid dream about packing up and going to Tyndale, the place, remember, that I did not want to go. And I listened and I went there. And it was even cool just because I had that time in Providence College. It put holes, I would say, in my course load that I needed to fill to graduate within the 4-year time slot. So what I had to do is take online courses that were not offered at Tyndale, but during the summertime. And the courses that I took during that time were the prerequisites. And I didn't know this because I didn't know what I would do after I graduated, but there were prerequisite courses that I needed to get into my master's. So once again, that was God at work. And at that same time, God also placed a neighbor in my parents' neighborhood where I was living at the time as well, who happened to be the admin assistant to the chief psychologist at the York Region District School Board. And I would be walking home from wherever I was coming from, and she would stop me and say, "Have you considered going into school psychology?" And once again, not interested in learning disabilities. That is not on my radar. But after I got a meeting with the chief psychologist, did some research, I felt like maybe this is where I want to go. I applied in person to the in-person program at the University of Calgary and the online program. I got accepted to both. And this is where my desire, once again, I wanted to stay home in Ontario. I did not want to go. But after God put people in my life, and the cool thing is too, they're not always Christians that he's put in my life. They're just people that are in the right place at the right time while I'm praying about things, that are giving me some of their guidance because they know, right? So I was encouraged to do the in-person program. That was a good choice because I met Scott in Calgary, and now we have two beautiful girls. So it was really cool, even that piece. So while I was in Calgary, I wanted to come home again. And this time I did come home. I came home because I wanted to be with my family. And it was actually a sacrifice to come home, because if I had stayed in Alberta, I would have been registered within a year. I would have got the title psychologist. Ontario doesn't use that for master level, even though the job is exactly the same. So no one knows what I do because it's a weird title that they've given me in Ontario. But the journey to get registered was hard and long, and I wanted to give up so many times. And it was because Ontario is stricter with the rules, and how long it takes to get registered. And then I decided to have kids, not planned, but perfect timing on God's part, right, to do that. And I had big exams while I was on maternity leave and things like that. But God was there the whole time. I came back. I was working for the York Region District School Board starting in 2013, and I was there for a long time. And then an opportunity came within the it was started a year ago, but with the Catholic Board, and it was a pandemic. And it was, how do you make that job switch in the middle of a pandemic? And I prayed a lot. Once again, God put the right people in the right places to encourage that move. And it's been awesome making that move. I think God had me at the public board for a time, and I think he has a purpose for me now at the Catholic board. And I've kind of like seen God over and over again, bringing me to where he wants.
For sure. That is such an encouraging story. And I think it's an encouragement to us that God uses people, right? Like we are his vessels. And he clearly placed so many people, Christian and non-Christian, in your life that so clearly led you to where he wanted you to go, which I think if we all take a moment, we can look back on people who have been that for us, but then we can also be that for other people as well. And I just thought of one thing, Laura, can you just tell us about when we were chatting at the beginning of the summer, you were talking about how there's not a lot of Christians in your line of work, but then something really cool happened.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, that is such an exciting situation. So one of the only Christians that I happen to know also was my professor at Tyndale. She goes to my parents' church, which is just kind of cool. And then I worked, and I guess not just worked, but I work with her in private practice as well. Sorry. So I also work for Central Ontario Psychology, which is in Barrie, and she's out of there too. So Anna and I are having this conversation. I'm getting frustrated that there's not a lot of people in this profession. And then one of the only Christians I know, who's a psychologist, ended up getting a very high leadership position within the college, overseeing a lot of decisions that they make, a lot of their guidelines and rules. And I was just so excited. And I was like, how is that so cool that God put this passion in my heart, and then also puts her in a leadership role, one of the only Christians I know within the College of Psychologists, at the exact same time that he is stirring this passion in me.
So cool that as we were having that conversation, God knew that he was going to place this woman who loves him in this leadership position. So he is working even when we don't see it. So what would you say, Laura, to someone who's in a similar position as you, something that you would say to encourage them?
For sure. So one of the things, kind of like life lessons, I guess, and when I was reflecting on every place that God was during my journey and just how he led me to where my passion is, but I didn't know, right? For people, especially young adults, teenagers, trying to figure out where they should go. It doesn't even matter if it's a career or not. So often we're like, but how do I hear God's voice? And I think God has so clearly shown me that if you're praying and you're living for him, you just have to move, kind of like a boat. If you're moving, he will steer you. And I know it sounds kind of cliche to say, but I think it's true. God will close a door, but he'll open another door. And so he gets you, if you're seeking him, he will get you to where he wants you to be, and where he wants you to be ends up actually being where you know you're supposed to be and kind of where your passion is.
Definitely. Well, you and I could talk for like 7 more hours easily, but let us know how we as a church family can be supporting you and your family and how we can be lifting you up in prayer.
For sure. So as far as my profession, I had already mentioned just for discernment and wisdom, just kind of navigating the world right now. And also, though, for opportunities, just pray for opportunities to be able to share my faith with those I work with, but also the children and the families that I work with in particular. So just opportunities, right, to share that. Those are my biggest prayer requests right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for just sharing with us what God has been doing in your life. And we hope and pray that it was an encouragement to you, our Grace Church family, and we will continue to lift you up in prayer.